You know that moment when your gut tells you something is wrong? You can't explain it, but deep inside, you feel it. A phone call goes unanswered. A text reads, "We're fine," but something about it just doesn't sit right. That quiet, gnawing suspicion becomes a throb in your chest. And then the silence stretches too long. That's how this nightmare began. Two bright, beautiful twin girls, full of life, giggles, and stories about unicorns and cartoons, vanished. Not from a dark alley, not from a stranger's grip, but while in the care of someone they were supposed to trust the most, their own father. And the person who would uncover the first terrifying clue? Their grandmother. What she found will send chills down your spine, not just because of what it revealed, but because of what it hid. But before we get into that, let me ask you something personal. Do you believe you can spot danger before it happens? Would you know if someone in your family was hiding a dark secret? This story will challenge everything you think you know about safety, trust, and the unthinkable things that can happen when no one's watching. And I promise you, if you stick with me through the end, you will get the answer you came here for. Not the kind of vague, half-explained ending that leaves you confused, but the full, gut-wrenching truth. You'll understand what really happened to those little girls. You'll understand why the grandmother's discovery shook investigators to their core. And you'll never look at a family dispute the same way again. Because this story, it's not just about two missing children. It's about the hidden cracks in a picture-perfect life. It's about how easy it is to overlook the red flags, how quickly things can spiral, and how sometimes, even when the signs are right in front of us, we don't want to believe what our heart already knows. And more than anything, it's about you. Your instincts, your connection to people, your willingness to protect those you love, even when it means asking the hard questions. Because the grandmother in this story, she did all of that. She felt something was off before anyone else did. And when no one would listen, she started digging on her own. What she uncovered changed everything. Now, I want to let you in on something. I didn't choose this story because it's a viral mystery or because it's trending right now under searches like Missing Twins Update, Father Suspects in Disappearance, or Grandmother Finds Clue in Missing Children Case. I chose it because it's real, because it could happen in any neighborhood, to any family, maybe even to someone you know. This isn't a movie. These are real people, with real pain, real love, and real secrets. The twin girls at the center of this tragedy, Ava and Olivia, were just 7 years old. The kind of girls who ran barefoot through sprinklers in the summer, who insisted on wearing matching pajamas every night, and who told their grandma every little detail about their day, no matter how small. Their father, Daniel, charming, educated, and seemingly devoted, had partial custody after a long and bitter legal fight with their mother, Emily. From the outside, he looked like a stable parent, trying to be in his daughters' lives. He had a steady job, no history of violence, and the court believed he deserved to spend time with his kids. But just days before the girls vanished, subtle changes started to happen. Small shifts in behavior, words left unsaid, and moments that, in hindsight, were screaming warnings. And here's where it gets really unsettling. Because what I'm about to tell you next is the part most people miss when they read about cases like this online. The part that never makes the headlines. It wasn't a dramatic car chase. It wasn't a violent break-in. It started with silence. The kind that settles over a house like dust when something terrible has already happened. One Sunday evening, Ava and Olivia were supposed to be returned to their mother after a weekend visit with their dad. But they didn't show up. No calls. No texts. Nothing. Emily, panicked, called Daniel. Straight to voicemail. She drove to his house. No answer. The lights were off. The blinds drawn. Still, she tried to rationalize it. Maybe he lost track of time. Maybe the girls fell asleep early. Maybe his phone died. But the grandmother, Emily's mother, Susan, she wasn't convinced. She had seen Daniel earlier that week, and something about him had chilled her. She couldn't put it into words, but his eyes looked empty, detached, as if he was somewhere else. She told Emily, "I know something's wrong. I feel it in my bones." That's when she did something that would make all the difference. She decided to go looking herself. And what she discovered in Daniel's garage is where this entire story pivots from heartbreaking to horrifying. But I'm not going to drop it all at once. You and we're going to walk through it step by step, piece by chilling piece. Because that's the only way to truly understand what went wrong and what clues everyone missed until it was almost too late. And I'm telling you now, once you hear what was hidden in that garage and why it mattered, you'll never forget it. This is the part that has detectives, psychologists, and millions of viewers across the country glued to the updates. We'll talk about what led up to the weekend visit, the custody battle that spiraled into something far darker. We'll uncover hidden messages, deleted texts, and the psychological profile of a father who everyone thought was just trying to be in his daughter's lives. We'll talk to experts who've worked on similar cases, and we'll examine the shocking evidence that police almost overlooked, if not for one grandmother's relentless intuition. So stay with me, because this isn't just a mystery, it's a cautionary tale. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Some of what we're about to uncover will make your heart race. Some of it may even make you angry, but it will make you think. And in a world where real danger often hides behind a smile, that kind of awareness can save lives. Now, I know how easy it is to click away, to move on to the next video. But if you've made it this far, you owe it to yourself to see this through. Because the story you're about to hear, it's not just another unsolved case. It's a story about family, fear, and the fine line between love and obsession. It's a story that'll keep you up at night, not because it's hard to believe, but because it's terrifyingly believable. And right now, as I speak to you, authorities are still working to piece everything together. Every minute, a new clue surfaces. Every hour, more people are joining the search, sharing the girls' photos, posting updates with hashtags like #FindAvaAndOlivia and #MissingTwinsInvestigation. But what the grandmother found that night, that's where it all began to unravel. So what was in that garage? What was Daniel hiding behind those locked doors? And why did a devoted father suddenly disappear with his daughters, leaving behind a trail of fear, silence, and secrets? Stick around, because what happens next changes everything. Just days before Ava and Olivia vanished, life for Daniel seemed oddly calm on the surface. He was still living in that small, tidy rental house just outside of Grand Junction, Colorado, a quiet town with good schools, friendly neighbors, and just enough distance from the chaos of the custody hearings that had consumed the last year. Daniel had taken a job with a local construction firm, nothing glamorous, but steady enough to meet the court's expectations. He showed up, signed the time cards, played the part. No arrests, no outbursts. Just a father trying to hold on to his right to see his children. That's what everyone believed. But as we start peeling back the layers of his life, we begin to see something far more complicated lurking beneath the surface. He wasn't just trying to be a father, he was trying to control a narrative. And the story he was building wasn't about family. It was about revenge, resentment, and something much darker. People close to Daniel described him as distant lately, more distracted, quieter, even irritable when it came to questions about the custody agreement. His coworkers at the site noticed him spending a lot of time on his phone, pacing near the edge of the lot during breaks, muttering things under his breath that no one could quite make out. He wasn't aggressive, not outwardly, but there was a tension around him, a sense of pressure building, like a man gripping a steering wheel too tight. Friends who used to see him every weekend said he'd stopped coming around. He wasn't answering texts, brushing off invitations. And when they asked about the girls, he only gave short, clipped replies. They're good. We're doing fine. Court stuff's almost done. But it wasn't. In fact, court proceedings were getting uglier. Daniel had recently lost a motion to extend his visitation hours. The judge had sided with Emily, citing inconsistencies in Daniel's communication and an increasingly hostile tone in his written messages. Emily had even brought a few of those emails to court, lines Daniel had written in the middle of the night, rants about how the system was stacked against fathers and how he wasn't going to be kept away from his own children. To some, it sounded like frustration. But to others, especially Susan, the girl's grandmother, it sounded like a threat buried in plain sight. She remembered telling Emily, "He's not right, honey. He's spiraling, and no one sees it but us." And then came the weekend. The visit that should have been routine. Ava and Olivia were picked up at noon on Friday. Emily said they were excited, smiling, already planning what movies to watch with their dad. There was no sign of distress. No hesitation. If anything, the girls seemed eager to see him. But Emily still felt uneasy. There had been something off in Daniel's voice when he spoke to her earlier that week. Polite, but mechanical. Cold. When she offered to send the girls with extra clothes and snacks, he refused. "I've got everything they need," he said flatly, and then hung up. It wasn't like him. Not exactly. The first red flag came that Saturday night. Emily texted Daniel to check in, just a casual message. "Hope the girls are doing okay. Let me know if you need anything." No reply. She waited. An hour passed. Then 2. She tried again. "Just checking in. Everything okay?" Still nothing. Now here's where things start to twist, because Daniel had always been prompt about communicating during his weekends. The custody agreement even required it. So when that silence stretched into Sunday morning, alarm bells were ringing. Now, here's the part no one saw coming. Susan, the grandmother, had driven past Daniel's house early Sunday afternoon. She was hoping to catch a glimpse, just to see if the girls were playing in the yard, or maybe wave to them if they were leaving for lunch. But when she pulled up, the house looked abandoned. No movement. No sounds. The car was parked in the same spot it had been 2 days earlier. Mail still sat in the box. But it was what she saw next that made her skin crawl. Daniel's garbage bins, usually left by the curb on Sundays, were missing. Not just empty. Gone. Hauled away, completely. She knocked. No answer. She peeked through a side window. Curtains drawn. That's when she pulled out her phone and started recording a short video. Just in case. Her voice trembled as she narrated. Sunday, 3 p.m., no sign of Daniel or the girls. Something's not right. Police were called that evening. A missing persons report was filed. And by Monday morning, Daniel's home became the center of a multi-agency investigation. Search dogs, forensic teams, and local reporters showed up, trying to piece together where the family had gone. The story hit local news channels fast. Clips began circulating under search titles like "Twins Missing in Colorado," "Urgent Amber Alert Grand Junction," and "Father Vanishes with Kids After Custody Ruling." People from all over the state started commenting on social media, wondering if this was another case of a parent gone rogue, or if something worse had happened. And that's when Susan decided to go back, before police had secured a full warrant to search the property. She remembered Daniel had kept a spare key under the porch years ago. She found it still there. What she discovered inside the garage would shift the investigation overnight. But before I tell you what it was, let's talk about what else was found, or rather, what wasn't found. There was no sign of forced entry. No blood. No broken glass. But oddly, certain items were missing. The girls' backpacks, their tablets, and a large duffel bag from the top of Daniel's closet. His laptop was gone, along with a notebook that he used to keep locked in a drawer near his bed. Emily said she'd seen that notebook once. It was filled with lists, plans, even strange drawings he'd made when he couldn't sleep. None of that was found. Instead, what investigators did find was a strange series of red herrings. A fake email account set up in Daniel's name, but used to send messages to a woman he had been briefly seeing, a local waitress named Rachel. Messages that made it sound like he was planning to leave town, maybe even take the girls on a trip. But Rachel swore she hadn't spoken to Daniel in months. Then came the receipt, found in the garage trash can, that showed a purchase from a local hardware store. Rope. Plastic sheeting. Zip ties. Items that could easily be explained away unless viewed through a darker lens. Investigators started pulling surveillance footage, looking for Daniel's truck, tracing credit card transactions. And each clue only deepened the confusion. Because here's the twist. Daniel's cell phone last pinged off a tower 60 miles away in the opposite direction of where anyone expected him to be. And not only that, another person's phone, one registered under a burner account, pinged in the same area just hours later. Was someone helping him? Did he have a plan all along? Or had something gone horribly wrong? And most disturbing of all, Why were there strange tire tracks leading away from his backyard, where a wooden fence had recently been pried open? Theories began to swirl. Some claimed Daniel had always had a secret plan to disappear. Others suspected Emily's boyfriend, Mark, a man with a short temper and a criminal record, might have had a role in pushing Daniel over the edge. Still others wondered if Susan herself, so desperate to protect her granddaughters, might have discovered something and taken matters into her own hands. Everyone had a motive. Everyone had secrets. And no one was talking. And now, you're beginning to see just how deep this mystery runs. This isn't a case of simple disappearance. It's a tangled web of custody battles, hidden resentments, and a father who may have been planning something far more sinister than anyone imagined. But we're only beginning to scratch the surface. Because what was in that garage is something that even hardened detectives say they'll never forget. When Susan stepped into that dimly lit garage, she wasn't expecting to find answers. In truth, she was just desperate for a sign, any sign, that her granddaughters were okay. What she found instead chilled her to the core. Behind the stack of old boxes and a tarp-covered workbench, there was a half-open storage container. Inside it, bundled in what looked like children's blankets, were two small pairs of shoes, identical glittery sneakers the twins had been wearing the day they vanished. Right beside them was a used juice box and a broken hairbrush Olivia always carried in her backpack. But that wasn't what sent Susan into a full panic. Tucked in the bottom corner of the container was a folded-up map with handwritten markings, routes, circled gas stations, and a red X drawn over what appeared to be an abandoned property just off Highway 50, miles from any real town. She snapped a picture of everything, heart pounding. But just as she turned to leave, she heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Approaching from the back of the house, Susan froze, terrified someone else was in the home. She ducked behind the workbench, clutching her phone. A few seconds passed. Silence. Then a door creaked open, followed by the sound of something metallic clinking. Keys? A toolbox? She couldn't tell. Whoever it was, they didn't call out. They didn't ask who was there. They just stood there for a moment, then slowly backed out, closing the door behind them. When she finally summoned the courage to leave, everything looked untouched, too untouched. As if someone had deliberately reset the scene. She rushed home and immediately called the lead detective. But when officers arrived later that evening, the storage container was gone. Completely. No blankets. No shoes. No map. Just empty space and a faint outline in the dust. And just like that, the only real physical clue was gone without a trace. The investigation took a sharp turn after that. Some officers began to quietly question Susan's credibility. They wondered out loud, off the record, if the stress had gotten to her, if maybe she had imagined what she saw in the panic of the moment. But Emily stood by her. She knew her mother. Knew she wouldn't fabricate something like that. Still, with no physical evidence to support her claims, it became her word against a locked and empty garage. Then came the warning. Anonymous, no return number, just a brief voicemail that arrived the following morning on Susan's landline. A man's voice, distorted but calm. You're not going to find them this way. Stop digging. Walk away. This doesn't end well for you. And just like that, the phone call disconnected. Authorities traced it to a burner cell, purchased in cash from a gas station nearly 200 miles away. Another dead end. Meanwhile, Daniel's truck was found, abandoned near a hiking trail, parked neatly between two trees as if someone wanted it hidden. Inside, investigators found a blanket, a coloring book, and two small snack wrappers, but no sign of the girls. No fingerprints. No blood. Nothing that suggested a struggle. And most importantly, no Daniel. Surveillance footage from nearby trail cams showed the truck entering the area late at night, headlights off, then nothing. The camera facing the trailhead had been mysteriously disabled the same night. Cut wires. No backup. Once again, evidence just evaporated. And that's when the story got darker. An old family friend, Tom Raskin, a man who'd once coached Daniel in high school, suddenly came forward, claiming he might have information. He told police that Daniel had reached out to him weeks before the disappearance, asking about quiet places off the grid where he could get some space to think. Tom had dismissed it as weird talk from an old friend on edge. But now, in hindsight, he believed Daniel might have been planning something. Investigators took his statement seriously, at first. But then Emily remembered something that turned everything sideways. Tom had once dated her, long before she married Daniel. And they hadn't ended on good terms. In fact, Daniel once accused Tom of trying to stay too close to Emily even after their breakup. Could it be possible Tom wasn't just a witness, but part of something deeper? Things became even murkier when a mysterious transaction surfaced on Daniel's financial records, a $2,000 withdrawal in cash just 2 days before the girls vanished. The account it came from wasn't even his primary one. It was an old joint account he shared with Emily years ago that was supposed to be closed. Somehow, Daniel had kept access. But where did the money go? Police tracked the ATM, but the camera at the location had been offline for maintenance at the time of the withdrawal. And the money trail ended there. As Emily pushed for more transparency from the police, she began to feel the pressure tightening. Detectives were growing colder. Some began subtly, suggesting that maybe Daniel hadn't acted alone. Maybe someone inside the family helped. A neighbor whispered that she'd seen a silver sedan in front of Susan's house late the night before the police showed up. No one knew who it belonged to. And just as things seemed to be spiraling, Susan's car was broken into. Nothing stolen, just the glove box torn open and the dash cam ripped out. No prints. No footage. Another warning? Another step closer to something no one wanted to face? As the days stretched into weeks, national headlines started to fade. Social media buzz slowed. The search lost momentum. But Emily and Susan refused to let go. They kept asking questions. Digging. Fighting to keep Ava and Olivia's names in the spotlight. But every time they got close, another piece of evidence vanished. Another lead turned cold. Another ally began to seem not so trustworthy. And just when they thought the trail had gone completely dead, a man showed up at a motel in southern Utah, claiming to be Daniel's cousin. He checked in using a fake ID but left behind something in a room, a drawing. 2 little girls holding hands, smiling. The same glittery shoes. And one chilling detail in the corner, a clock. No numbers. Just hands drawn pointing to midnight. What does it mean? Why the clock? Why that time? And most importantly, is it a message or a countdown? 3 days after the motel clue was discovered, just as Emily was beginning to piece together what the midnight clock might represent, another shockwave rippled through the already fragile investigation, this time hitting someone who hadn't spoken publicly since the girls vanished. Rachel Maynard, Daniel's younger sister, had been keeping her distance, living quietly out in Flagstaff. She hadn't returned any calls, hadn't made a single statement, and reportedly told friends she was processing everything in her own time. But what no one knew until now was that Rachel had also received something. She didn't tell police. She didn't even tell Emily. Instead, she called an old college friend, someone she used to trust implicitly, and begged them to meet her in person. When they did, Rachel pulled out a plain brown envelope, no return address, no stamps, just hand-delivered to her doorstep sometime during the night. Inside was a photograph, grainy, black and white, likely from a security camera. It showed the outline of a man walking with 2 small children in what looked like a parking garage. The kids were wearing matching coats. And even through the distortion, Rachel swore it looked like Olivia and Ava. But what terrified her most wasn't the photo. It was the message scrawled on the back, in shaky red ink. Loyalty is a choice. Yours expires soon. There was no name, no explanation, just that one sentence and the photograph that shouldn't have existed. The timestamp had been deliberately blurred, the location cropped out, as if someone wanted her to know the girls might still be alive, but also wanted to remind her that someone was watching her, too. When Rachel finally showed it to Emily, she broke down in tears. Not because of the message, but because of what it meant. She confessed something she had buried for years. That Daniel had once asked her for help creating a false ID years ago, back when his business was under federal audit. She never thought he actually used it. She assumed he got scared, moved on. But now she was wondering, Had he kept it all this time? Was he using it now? Meanwhile, new evidence recovered from a traffic cam on Highway 50, completely overlooked in the initial investigation, surfaced thanks to a freelance investigator Susan had hired on her own. In the footage, time-stamped 2 hours after the twins disappeared, a truck matching Daniel's was seen heading westbound, but the driver was clearly not Daniel. This man was taller, broader-shouldered, wearing a beanie and what appeared to be latex gloves. In the passenger seat, a small figure, possibly a child. The license plate had been obscured, deliberately smeared with mud, but the body damage on the rear panel matched Daniel's exactly. Police hadn't caught this angle before, possibly due to a clerical oversight, or something worse. The image threw the entire case into question. If Daniel wasn't the one driving the truck, then who was? And then came the twist that no one could explain. A text message was sent to Emily's phone from a contact labeled Daniel, even though his number had been disconnected for weeks. The message read, "They lied to you. Ask Mom about Silver Fox. She knows." Emily stared at her phone, hands shaking. The nickname Silver Fox was one she hadn't heard in years, not since she was a teenager. It was what her late father used to call a man who frequently visited their family's cabin in Colorado, an old friend, or so she thought. When she asked Susan, her mother went pale, visibly trembling before she admitted the truth. Silver Fox wasn't just a nickname. It was the codename used by a man who once ran covert transport routes for a private security firm. Someone who had access to off-the-grid safe houses and untraceable vehicles. And Susan hadn't spoken to him in over 15 years, until a few weeks before the twins vanished. He had reached out, cryptically asking how Daniel was doing and if Susan still had that spare cabin key. The revelation dropped like a bombshell. Why had Susan kept this from everyone? Why hadn't she told Emily about the visit or the phone call? Susan insisted she didn't think it was relevant at the time, that she hadn't connected the dots. But now it looked like someone had been planning this for much longer than anyone realized. Worse, it suggested that Daniel might not be the mastermind, but a pawn, or even a target himself. Could someone from Susan's past be manipulating everything from behind the curtain, exploiting old relationships and buried secrets? The theory grew legs when the freelance investigator traced the Silver Fox, alias back to a former contractor who had disappeared from official records in 2012 after a controversial whistleblower case involving children being smuggled across borders under the guise of witness protection. At the time, the investigation was shut down due to lack of credible evidence. But now, with the clock drawing attention and new leads emerging, the pattern seemed chillingly familiar. A mysterious man operating outside the law. Children who vanish without a trace. A trail that vanishes just as quickly as it appears. Was this more than a family tragedy? Was this an operation? Just when Emily thought she couldn't be pulled deeper, she received an unmarked package. Inside was a VHS tape. No label, just a date. April 6th. The day the girls went missing. Susan still had an old player in her attic, and the two of them watched it together in stunned silence. The footage was fuzzy, static-filled, but clear enough to make out. It showed two children, Olivia and Ava, sitting in what appeared to be a basement. They weren't restrained. They weren't crying. They were playing. A voice off-screen asked them what game they wanted to play next, and one of the girls said softly, "Hide and seek." Then the tape cut out. No faces. No clues to where it was filmed. No further footage. But it changed everything. The girls had been alive. Possibly still were. And whoever had them wanted them to be seen, to be remembered, but not rescued, not yet. And just when you think you've wrapped your head around this web, a new name enters the picture, someone who was never mentioned before. A name on an old utility bill found stuffed under a loose floorboard at Daniel's last known location. A name that had no ties to the family. No reason to be there. But once traced, it linked back to something no one could have seen coming. Emily had always believed that whatever this nightmare was, whoever was behind it, it was happening around her, not to her. She was the mother, the searcher, the one chasing shadows. But all of that changed on a rainy Thursday afternoon, when her world suddenly, and violently, tilted. She was leaving her office, clutching a folder of handwritten notes from her latest meeting with a freelance investigator, when she noticed a black SUV parked across the street. Not particularly unusual for the city, but this one stood out. It was spotless despite the muddy weather, idling without headlights, engine quietly humming like a predator watching its prey. She felt the gaze before she saw it. A figure sat inside, face obscured by dark glasses, phone raised as if taking a photo or recording. Emily paused, caught in that split-second moment of fight or flight, then quickly ducked into her car, locking the doors immediately. She told herself it was probably nothing. A coincidence. Just her nerves. But as she pulled out of the parking lot, the SUV did the same, mirroring every turn, staying exactly 3 car lengths behind. At first, she tried to rationalize it. Traffic. Shared destination. 100 innocent possibilities. But when she took an unexpected detour through a gas station and exited through a rear alley, the SUV still followed. No headlights. No license plate on the front. That's when the panic set in. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel. Her mouth went dry. She hit speed dial and called Susan, breathless, begging her to stay inside and lock the doors. "I think I'm being followed," she whispered, glancing at her rearview mirror for the 5th time in under a minute. But by the time she reached a crowded intersection and dared to look again, the SUV was gone. Vanished. As if it had never been there. Not a trace. No tire screech, no turn signal, no exit. Just empty road behind her and the deep, sinking knowledge that someone had been watching. Hunting. Later that night, things got worse. Much worse. Susan didn't answer her phone. Unusual, but not alarming, until Emily arrived at her mother's house and found the front door ajar. The lights were on. The TV was playing one of those old crime documentaries Susan loved. But her mother was nowhere to be found. Her purse was still on the counter. Her keys were in the bowl by the door. Her shoes by the rug. All signs pointed to a quick, casual moment, like she'd stepped out for something and never came back. But the back window was open just a crack, the curtains swaying in the wind. There were no signs of a break-in, no mess, no scuffle. Nothing stolen. Just an eerie absence and a sense of wrongness that wrapped around Emily like a noose. She called 911, hands shaking so hard she could barely hold the phone. Officers responded quickly, combing the area, but there was nothing to go on. No neighbors had seen or heard anything unusual. No cameras captured anyone coming or going. It was as if Susan had been lifted right out of her life by invisible hands. But what truly shattered Emily was what she found on the kitchen table, an envelope, addressed to her in looping cursive. Inside was a photo, another one of the twins, this time asleep in what looked like a moving vehicle. Sunlight streamed through the window, and in the corner, a reflection of the same black SUV. On the back of the photo, a message: "You're getting too close. Let it go, or she disappears forever." Emily collapsed into a chair, the envelope trembling in her grip. This wasn't just about the twins anymore. The rules had changed. The game had escalated. Now, the puppet strings were tightening around her too. And for the first time, she realized something horrifying. Someone was always one step ahead. They knew her moves, her routines, her weaknesses. Her mother had been taken not to cover tracks, but as leverage. A move made by someone with confidence and resources, someone who wasn't afraid of being found out, because they had buried their secrets so deep, even the truth couldn't reach them. In the hours that followed, paranoia crept into every corner of her mind. She unplugged her laptop, tore her phone apart, shut every curtain in her home. But none of it brought peace. Because how do you protect yourself from someone who already knows everything about you? Who has studied your family, your history, your habits? And more disturbingly, why was this happening now? What had triggered this escalation? That question haunted her, gnawing at the edge of her sanity. The only potential clue was the name from the utility bill, the one found under the floorboard of Daniel's abandoned rental. The name belonged to a man named Elias Crane, a name with no direct link to the family. No phone number, no criminal record. But a little digging uncovered something deeply unsettling. Elias Crane had once worked for a private research group that contracted with federal agencies, specializing in behavior analysis and psychological profiling. One that had gone defunct nearly a decade ago after a scandal involving unauthorized human testing and missing participants. His file was sealed. But Emily's investigator found one unclassified record, an address. Not current. Just the last known property owned by Elias Crane before he disappeared from the system. It was a cabin, a remote one, located deep in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado, the same region where Susan and Daniel used to take the twins camping every summer. Emily stared at the address in disbelief, her heart racing. Had this all started back then? Was this tied to something that happened during one of those innocent family trips? Did Daniel know? Did Susan? And just as her mind raced to connect the pieces, her phone vibrated. A new message. No sender. Just a single sentence. Time's up, Emily. Midnight waits for no one. The road leading to the San Juan cabin was narrow and lined with snowdrifts that hadn't melted since winter's last breath. Emily drove in silence, heart pounding as the tires crunched over gravel and pine needles. The place hadn't been used in years, at least not by anyone she knew. But it was still registered in Daniel's name, still tucked away behind acres of forest, like a forgotten chapter no one dared reopen. When she finally reached the clearing, the cabin stood still and haunting, weathered wood, crooked shutters, a porch swing swaying ever so slightly in the mountain breeze. It looked abandoned, but the feeling in Emily's gut told her otherwise. Her flashlight flickered weakly as she approached, and she half expected someone to be watching from the trees. She pushed open the door, bracing herself for answers she wasn't sure she wanted. Inside, dust hung in the air like ash, disturbed only by faint footprints across the floor. Someone had been here. Recently. There were no personal belongings, no signs of life, except for one thing, a pile of burned photographs in the fireplace. Charred edges, scorched faces. Emily used the poker to pull one out. It was of the twins, maybe 5 or 6 years old, playing in the cabin's yard. Another showed Daniel and Susan, younger, smiling in front of the same porch. But what caught her breath was the final one, only half-burned. It showed a little girl, not Olivia, not Ava, a different child entirely. Dark hair, sharp eyes, unmistakably familiar. The handwriting on the back read, Emily, age 4. It hit her like a freight train. Why was there a photo of her, as a child, hidden here? Who took it, and why was someone trying to erase it? Emily staggered backward, mind spinning, and that's when she saw it. Behind a false panel in the cabin wall, a small metal box. Inside were documents sealed in plastic, along with a stack of medical records and a grainy VHS tape labeled simply 1992, Subject 6. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the papers. At first, it was all jargon, cognitive markers, behavioral traits, sociological response indicators. But then she saw it, her name. Her full name. Listed under a subject file from a pilot behavioral conditioning program, dated when she was just a toddler. The agency responsible had been redacted, but a symbol on the top corner gave her a jolt. It was the same emblem that had appeared on the envelope Rachel had received, the one that warned of loyalty expiring. None of this made sense. Or maybe it made too much sense. Everything she thought she knew about her past, her childhood, her family's trips to Colorado, even her father's mysterious death when she was young, was suddenly under question. Could it be that this wasn't just about Olivia and Ava? Could it be that she had been the original target all along? That her daughters were taken not as leverage, but because they were part of something larger, something that had begun with her? The idea was so twisted, so unimaginable, that she could barely breathe. But the clues were there. Her mother's strange behavior. Daniel's paranoia. Rachel's silence. It wasn't coincidence. It was cover-up. Carefully layered, expertly orchestrated, until the only thing left standing was a lie called normal life. And then, as if fate wanted to confirm her worst fear, her phone buzzed with a call from a number labeled private line. Against every instinct, she answered. A woman's voice came through, calm, articulate, detached. "Emily," the voice said. "You were never supposed to come this far." Emily froze. "Who is this?" she demanded. But the voice continued, unfazed. "The twins are safe, for now. But if you open that tape, you won't be able to go back. Are you prepared to give up everything for a truth that won't save them?" Emily's blood ran cold. "What do you want?" she asked, voice cracking. The woman paused, then said, "I want you to stop remembering." The call ended. Alone in the cabin, surrounded by ash and ghosts, Emily sank to the floor, holding the VHS tape like it was a live wire. Her mind raced back to the visions, the dreams, the strange feelings she'd always dismissed as anxiety or déjà vu. Maybe they weren't hallucinations. Maybe they were repressed, buried on purpose. The truth was no longer about Daniel, or even the twins. The real story, the one she was now knee-deep in, was about a buried experiment, a childhood rewritten, and a woman who had unknowingly become a threat to people far more powerful than she had ever imagined. And the worst part? She had no idea who was telling the truth anymore. Because the next time she tried to contact Rachel, her number was disconnected. The investigator she'd hired? Gone. His apartment cleared out overnight. No forwarding address. No digital footprint. One by one, her allies were vanishing. And she was beginning to wonder, had the mystery ever been about her daughters at all? Emily sat on the cabin floor as night closed in around her like a trap, the cold creeping into her bones. The VHS tape sat heavy in her lap, as if it knew its contents would fracture everything she'd ever believed. Every instinct screamed at her not to watch it, not to open a door that had been bolted shut for decades, but the need for answers was stronger than fear now. She packed the tape carefully and left the cabin just before midnight, racing back to a nearby town with the only functioning video player she could find, an old pawn shop run by a man who didn't ask questions when she begged to use the dusty TV VCR combo in the back room. She pushed the tape in, heart pounding so violently it felt like it might shatter her chest. The screen flickered. Static. Then footage rolled. Grainy. Silent. A cold, fluorescent-lit room. A row of children seated at a table, all about 4 or 5 years old. One of them was unmistakably her. Emily. Strapped into a chair. Electrodes on her temples. She stared blankly into a light box as shadowy figures scribbled notes behind a mirrored wall. The timestamp read 1992. Her eyes twitched unnaturally, as if she were reacting to something invisible. Then came a title slide, Subject 6, Memory Compression and Behavioral Partitioning, Test Number 14. Emily recoiled from the screen, nausea clawing at her throat. The tape showed more, her crying, convulsing, being dragged out of frame by masked figures. Another test. Another day. Another round of silence from the adults who were supposed to protect her. She had been part of something she never agreed to, never remembered. And now, someone was making sure it stayed buried. Back at her motel that night, the consequences of what she'd uncovered began closing in. A knock came at the door just after 3 a.m. It wasn't law enforcement. It wasn't a friend. It was Rachel. Pale, shaken, but very much alive. "I don't have much time," she said as she slipped inside. "I came to warn you, everything you think you know about Daniel, about your childhood, even your mother, it's not the full picture. There's something you need to see." She handed over a small USB drive. Before Daniel disappeared, he was trying to blow the whistle. He had files, proof that you were monitored from the time you were born. That someone was watching your family for generations, not just you. It wasn't just an experiment. It was inheritance. You weren't the only one. Emily stared at her, stunned. "What do you mean I wasn't the only one?" Rachel took a long breath. "Your father. He was part of it too. But he tried to get out, and he died for it." The world tilted. Emily's knees buckled. She grabbed the dresser for balance, but her vision blurred with questions and fear. "So, this is why they took the twins? Because of me?" Rachel hesitated. "Yes and no. They're not just after you. They're after what's inside them. Memories. Data. Conditioning that never got erased. Someone kept the cycle going, even after the program was shut down. And now that you're remembering, they're scared. You're a liability. That's why they're using your daughters to control you. Before Emily could respond, Rachel stepped back, eyes dark. But you have to choose, Emily. You can take this drive and go public. Blow it wide open. Burn their entire operation to the ground. Or you can trade it. There's someone waiting. Someone who says they'll return your girls if you hand this over, without making a sound. Emily felt like her lungs were being crushed. The weight of the decision paralyzed her. Save her daughters and stay silent? Or expose the truth and risk never seeing them again? It wasn't just a moral dilemma, it was emotional warfare. Her entire life had been manipulated, and now she was being forced to either protect her family or confront the evil that had destroyed it. And then Rachel said something that shattered whatever hope was left. Your mother knew. She made a deal years ago. That's why she disappeared. She went back to protect you, or at least delay what's coming. Emily collapsed onto the bed, her body racked with a rage so deep it didn't even feel like hers. Her whole world had been engineered. Her childhood, her relationships, even her sense of identity, sculpted by people who had always been in the shadows. The real enemy wasn't just one person. It was a system, a network that had used her like a pawn and now wanted to erase her like a mistake. And just when she thought it couldn't get worse, her phone buzzed. A photo. Olivia and Ava. But this time, they weren't alone. Standing behind them, barely visible in the mirror, was her father.
Alive.
Or someone who looked just like him. Emily had barely processed the image when the motel room lights cut out, plunging her into darkness. The soft blue glow from her phone was the only light in the room, and even that felt like a target on her back. She clutched it, staring again at the picture. The twins standing by a window, pale and blank-eyed, with the unmistakable silhouette of her father just behind them. Was it real? Old? Doctored? She didn't know anymore. Every piece of truth felt poisoned. She spun toward Rachel, but she was gone. The window was open, curtains flapping. Just like that, the only person who seemed to know anything had vanished again. Emily was alone, and the walls were closing in fast. She grabbed the USB drive Rachel had given her and bolted into the night, heart racing. Every instinct screamed to run, but she couldn't keep running without knowing what this was really about. She needed a place with real tech, real access. There was one person left who might help. Someone she hadn't spoken to in years, not since college. Leo, the hacker-turned-cybersecurity analyst who had once gotten them out of a tight spot involving stolen IDs and a college professor with too many secrets. He owed her. She just hoped he hadn't gone completely straight. She found him working out of a cluttered home office north of Boulder, the kind of place with blackout curtains, 5 monitors glowing at all hours, and a cat named Firewall perched on the printer. He took one look at her face and didn't even ask questions, just plugged in the USB drive and started decrypting. It wasn't just about her. The files held records of dozens of names of children flagged as candidates, born across different decades, from different families, but all tied to the same shadow project. Psychological priming, synthetic trauma loops, memory partitioning, all designed to build behavioral outliers. Not assassins. Not soldiers. Something worse. Programmable influencers. People unknowingly shaped from childhood to react to triggers, to follow certain thought paths, to manipulate the flow of truth itself. This wasn't a government op. This was privatized.
Corporate.
Funded by a biotech conglomerate that had changed names over the years but maintained one goal: control the minds that control the world. Influencers. Political aides. CEOs. Even journalists. People the public trusted. Or feared. Emily scrolled through the list, bile rising in her throat as she saw familiar names. Teachers. Childhood friends. Even her high school counselor. Her entire life had been surrounded by plants. Observers. Monitors. And one name froze her blood. Rachel Holbrook. There she was, listed as a field asset assigned to Subject 6. All those emotional talks. The warnings. The USB drive. It had all been part of the test. She was never helping. She was managing. Emily staggered back from the screen, tears burning hot in her eyes. She lied to me. All of it. She knew. Leo just nodded grimly, mouth tight. You're not the only one, Em. This thing goes all the way to federal contractors, research universities, even media networks. It's been active for decades. You're one of the few they couldn't completely wipe because you slipped through the cracks when your father tried to defect. And just like that, the final betrayal fell into place. Her father wasn't a victim. He was a builder. He helped design the very system that broke her mind, that now held her daughters hostage. He didn't die protecting her. He vanished because he knew too much, maybe even to hide his own shame. And now, somehow, he was back.
Alive.
Or, at least being used to keep her compliant. Before Emily could gather herself, a hard knock came at the door. Leo moved toward the window, peeking out carefully. We've got company, he said under his breath. Black SUVs. 3 of them. Unmarked plates. And they're not feds. These guys don't knock twice. Emily's mind raced. They couldn't let them take the drive.
Not now.
But she couldn't leave without getting one final answer. Where were Olivia and Ava? Leo moved quickly, copying files to a secure server and destroying the USB. I'll bury this in 6 different countries' clouds. If anything happens to me, it goes live. He handed her a burner phone and a set of coordinates. This is where the transmission in that photo came from. It's a private research facility built under a fake environmental nonprofit in Utah. That's where they're holding your girls. Emily didn't ask how he knew. She didn't have time. She hugged him hard, whispered a thank you she knew might be goodbye, and slipped out through the back. The night air was thick with dread, headlights sweeping across the street as figures in tactical gear closed in on the front. She drove like a fugitive, heart pounding against the ticking clock. The truth was finally in focus, and it was far worse than she'd feared. This wasn't about kidnapping. This wasn't even about control. It was about a world quietly built on manufactured personalities and weaponized trust. And she was about to bring the whole thing crashing down or disappear trying. The facility loomed ahead, hidden behind a veil of mist and scrubland in the desolate hills of southern Utah. The night sky pressed down heavily, the air thick with a kind of tension that made her heart feel like it was about to crack open. Emily barely slowed as she approached the perimeter gate, feeling every inch of her body hum with both fear and fury. The GPS coordinates Leo had given her led her here, a facility disguised as a seemingly innocuous environmental research compound. The truth, though, was far darker. This was where it all began, and now it was where it would all end. She parked the car a half-mile from the entrance, cutting the engine and creeping through the dense underbrush. Every step was calculated, every move deliberate. She was close, closer than she'd ever been to uncovering the full scope of the conspiracy. But even with the clarity of purpose, the weight of the situation pressed heavily on her chest. If they caught her, there would be no coming back. If the facility security didn't do her in, the people behind it all, the ones who had been watching her, manipulating her, controlling everything, would finish the job. She had no illusions anymore. She wasn't walking into a fight. She was walking into a war, one she wasn't sure she was prepared to win. The compound's lights were dim, casting long shadows that made the place feel like a tomb. Emily moved through the underbrush, following the faintest traces of motion detection panels in the yard. She could hear the faint hum of surveillance cameras panning, their lenses tracking every moment, every movement. Her heart was a drumbeat in her ears as she approached the main entrance, the security guards oblivious to her presence. Her mind flashed to the photo, the one she had seen of her daughters, locked away in some sterile room, their faces void of emotion. It was the last piece of the puzzle. Olivia and Ava were more than just hostages. They were the final piece of the program, the culmination of everything that had been done to Emily and the others like her. They were part of a generational experiment that had spanned decades, crafted from the darkest corners of behavioral science. And now, the people behind it all believed they had finally achieved their goal: perfect control. But Emily wasn't going to let that happen. She wouldn't let them use her daughters to finish what they'd started. She found her way inside through an old maintenance shaft, slipping through air vents and narrow hallways until she reached the main control room. She could see the security monitors, a dozen images flickering across the screens, cameras scanning the facility, including the room where her daughters were being held. But something was wrong. The room was empty. The monitors were static. And the whole place seemed too quiet. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as the door to the control room slid open behind her, a figure emerging from the shadows. It was a woman, tall, dressed in dark tactical gear. For a second, Emily froze, every instinct telling her to prepare for a fight. But as the figure stepped into the light, she recognized the face. It was Rachel.
Alive.
And wearing the same cold, calculating expression she had when they first met. But now, there was something darker, more predatory in her eyes. "You're late," Rachel said, her voice devoid of emotion. "I thought you'd have figured it out by now, Emily." Emily's throat tightened. She had hoped she was wrong. She had hoped the betrayal wasn't real. But standing there, looking into Rachel's eyes, she knew the truth. You were part of it all along." Rachel didn't flinch. Instead, she took a step closer. "Not part of it. I built it. This isn't just a project. This is an evolution. You were always the prototype, Emily. The beginning. And your daughters? They're the perfect endgame. Perfectly shaped, perfectly malleable. You think you're protecting them, but you're too late. They're already part of the system." Everything Emily had fought for, her memories, her family, the truth, felt like it was slipping through her fingers. But there was one thing she knew for sure. Rachel wasn't going to get away with this. Without warning, she lunged forward, knocking Rachel back against the control panel. The crash sent a cascade of alarms blaring throughout the facility, the red lights flashing violently. "Where are they?" Emily demanded, her voice tight with fury. Rachel wiped the blood from her lip, a smile curling on her face. "You're too late," she repeated, but this time there was a note of triumph in her voice. "They've already been activated." The words hit Emily like a punch to the gut. Activated. What did that mean? Her thoughts raced. What did you do to them? But before Rachel could respond, another figure stepped into the room. This time, Emily didn't recognize the man. He was tall, imposing, his face obscured by a black mask. But it wasn't his appearance that froze Emily's blood. It was the weapon he carried. A sleek, futuristic device. And in his other hand, he held her daughter's phones. Still active. Still connected to the network. "Enough, Rachel," the man said, his voice cold. "We can't risk her anymore." Rachel gave a small laugh, brushing herself off. She was never part of the plan. She's always been a variable. The man stepped forward, raising the device. Emily's heart slammed into her ribs. "What are you doing to them?" she shouted, panic rising in her chest. "They're just the final step in a larger equation," Rachel said, her eyes cold. "You can't stop it now. The transmission is already out." Before Emily could react, the man triggered the device, sending a sharp pulse of energy through the room. The air crackled, and for a brief moment, everything went still. Then, everything changed. The screens flickered back to life. But now, it wasn't just her daughter's faces. It was her own. The same empty, expressionless stare she had seen in those haunting old footage clips. And slowly, one by one, the faces of those she trusted, her friends, family, even the people she thought she could depend on, filled the screen. They were all part of it. Every single one. The conspiracy wasn't just about her. It was a network sprawling across industries, governments, and corporations. A hidden hand controlling everything. The truth was so much bigger than she had ever imagined. And as the man's cold eyes met hers, a terrifying realization hit her. They were watching everyone. Before Emily could even scream, everything went black. The lights flickered back to life, and Emily's head spun as she came to. The pulse from the device still echoed in her veins, like a deep hum vibrating through her chest. For a moment, she couldn't make sense of where she was. Her surroundings were disorienting, distant. It took her a few seconds to realize she was still in the control room, her hands cuffed to a cold, metal chair. The man who had held her daughter's phones, the one who had activated the device, was now standing by a screen, his back to her. Rachel was nowhere to be seen, her absence only amplifying the silence in the room. As Emily's eyes adjusted to the dim light, she realized something strange. She wasn't alone. Behind her, in the shadows, a figure stepped forward, someone she thought she'd never see again. It was her father, the man who had disappeared, who had been presumed dead for years. His eyes were tired, his face hardened by time, but unmistakable. The man who had once been her protector was now standing here as part of the very system she had been fighting against. The betrayal cut deeper than anything she could have imagined. "You're alive," she whispered, the words barely audible in the sterile room. Her father didn't respond immediately. He walked toward her slowly, his movements deliberate. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained, weighed down by guilt and regret. "I never wanted you to be part of this, Emily. I never wanted to drag you into a world of lies. But there was no choice. No way out." His words stung, the realization that everything she had believed about him was now shattered. "You were always the key," he continued, his tone tinged with sadness. "Your mind, your strength. They used you because you were always meant to be part of it. I couldn't protect you from that. I thought I could escape, but there is no escape. Not for me, and certainly not for you." Emily's heart raced, her mind reeling. It was like everything she had believed in her entire life. The love, the family, the bond she thought she shared with her father had been nothing but a carefully orchestrated illusion. He hadn't been protecting her. He had been part of the machine, part of the very thing she had been fighting to destroy. As the weight of those words settled in, Emily felt something shift inside her. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was a deep, unbearable sadness. The truth had been so elusive for so long, but now it was as if the world had been laid bare before her, and it was uglier than she could have imagined. She had spent so long searching for answers, thinking that the missing pieces would bring her clarity. But now that she had them, she realized that the truth didn't make things better. It didn't bring her peace. It only brought more questions, more doubts. Suddenly, her father stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm but filled with the weight of years lost. "You have to understand, Emily. I never wanted to be the villain. I never wanted to be the one who hurt you." He paused, his voice cracking. "But the system, it's too big. You can't fight it alone. No one can. You have to let it go." Emily shook her head, a tear slipping down her cheek as the reality of his words sank in. Let it go? How could she let it go when everything she loved had been ripped apart? How could she forgive him when his actions had put her daughters and so many others at the mercy of this monstrous machine? She wanted to scream, to fight back. But something inside her, deep down, told her that continuing to fight wouldn't bring her the answers she needed. It wouldn't bring her peace. But just as quickly as the thought formed, another one emerged. She didn't have to let it go. She didn't have to accept this fate. The machine wasn't invincible. She wasn't powerless. As much as her father had tried to make her believe she was trapped in a cycle she couldn't escape, Emily knew now that the most dangerous thing she could do was give up, to accept their version of the truth, to be swallowed whole by their lies. She looked up at her father, her resolve hardening. "I'll never stop fighting," she said, her voice low and steady. "I won't let you or anyone else control me or my daughters. I'm going to take this down, no matter what it takes." For a moment, her father's eyes softened, a flicker of something almost human breaking through the walls he had built around himself. But then, just as quickly, it was gone. "You don't understand," he said. "The system doesn't just control you. It controls everyone. Your fight will only make things worse." Emily didn't reply. There was nothing more to say. She had already made her decision. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, drawing her attention. The door to the control room swung open and Rachel walked in. But she wasn't the same woman she had been before. This time, there was no smugness in her eyes. No sense of superiority. There was only a cold, calculating certainty. "It's over, Emily," she said, her voice calm but final. "You've been trying to fight something you'll never beat. It's already been decided." But Emily wasn't listening anymore.
She didn't need to.
The pieces had fallen into place, and the future was clear. She had her own plan now, and it didn't matter what Rachel or her father said. Emily's fight wasn't just for survival anymore. It was for the future. For her daughters. For everyone who had ever been trapped in the system's grip. As she turned to face the two of them, one final thought passed through her mind. Maybe the system couldn't be destroyed overnight, but it could be dismantled piece by piece. And she would make sure it was. The last thing Emily saw before the doors slammed shut behind her was the faint flicker of the monitors in the control room, the faces of countless people who had been molded, shaped, and controlled by forces they couldn't even comprehend. Some of them would escape. Some of them, like Emily, would fight back. But in the end, it wouldn't be just her story. It would be the story of everyone who had ever been lost in the machine, everyone who had been erased.